Now, Nigeria has 4 refineries, 2 of which are in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, 1 in Warri, Delta State, and 1 in Kaduna. The 4 refineries in the country have a combined capacity to process around 4.45 million barrels per day, but sadly, they have produced little or no fuel over the past decade. This means that Nigeria has imported almost all its refined fuel needs. The country not only spends so much on fuel importation, but also spends much on turnaround maintenance almost yearly with no results. This is why the Senate has tasked its ad hoc committee to investigate all contracts awarded for rehabilitation of all state-owned refineries from 2010 to 2023. This followed the adoption of a motion on urgent need to investigate various turnaround maintenance projects of Nigerian refineries over a 13-year period to uncover waste and forestall further waste of scarce public resources. The committee is to submit its report in 4 weeks. TVC News National Assembly correspondent Tejesu Adeoye reports.
In his presentation at the Upper Legislative Chamber on Tuesday, Senator Karimi Sunday brought the Senate's focus to the state of the country's refineries and the questionable turnaround maintenance project from 2010 to date. The Kogi lawmaker describes the situation with the refineries as a grave mismanagement of public finances, which he says has created doubts about Nigeria's status as an oil-producing nation. His investigation reveals an expenditure of more than 6 trillion naira on fuel subsidies and nearly twice that amount on the turnaround maintenance project in refineries across Port Harcourt, Kaduna, and Warri during the decade under review. Senator Sunday and his colleagues have now committed to stopping this trend that fritters away the country's resources.
You can't continue to waste money on those refineries. Government has to take decisive decision on that issue.
Senator Karimi, who is also the chairman of the Senate Services Committee, also talked about the controversy surrounding the alleged 68 billion naira earmarked for new vehicles for the 10th Senate members.
We did a comparative analysis of cost, of durability, and they came up with suggestions. And we took their suggestions. And somebody that is a minister, you have more than 6, maybe 3 Land Cruiser, Prado, and other vehicles in their convoy. And you are not asking them questions. Please spare us a bit.
The Senate has now established an ad hoc committee tasked with engaging the Federal Ministry of Petroleum Resources, NNPC, NUPRC, BPE, and other relevant government agencies. Their mission is to assess the progress of ongoing contracts in all refineries and devise a strategy to make state-owned refineries commercially viable and profitable in Nigeria. Tejesu Adeoye, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, joining us in the studio is Adeni Ikunu, policy analyst. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
One thing that is mind-boggling, 11.35 trillion naira spent over the years, and the question is, how is it that we could have allowed such wastage for a national asset? Because yes, that's what it has been. That's what it is.
Yes, please.
Over the years.
In the first place, we have to go back to NNPC before it became NNPCL. Every organization, especially as big as NNPC, has what we call compliance and monitoring units. Then you also have procurement departments. It therefore means that if there's anything that happens with regard to getting any contract done or any major work done, they've got members of staff with the responsibility to ensure that whatever money spent on any of their facility or infrastructure actually is monitored and feedbacks are given. Reports are put together, and such reports goes to the GMD of NNPC. I'm deliberate using NNPC because if you're talking about NNPCL, our max is about 2 years, and we're talking about a 13-year period that this malfeasance has taken place. So you'd have to ask the question, who headed these respective units first? That's the first question. Then second, this is the 10th assembly. For every assembly, particularly the 8th and 9th assembly, we've always had the committee chair for upstream, downstream, and gas.
Yes.
So the question again is to go to those committee chairpersons and those that formed members of those committees, that how did it happen that this country has suffered such losses? That's number two. The third thing, when we're talking about creating new names or new identities for organizations, there are always handover notes that are looked at where the people who take it over are able to prove what had happened. As a matter of fact, this should not have been something brought forth by the lawmaker Karimi. It should have been brought forth by NNPC, becoming NNPCL, where it says, this was what we met. And because we're giving a new identity to NNPC, to NNPCL, and want to start on a clean slate, we are not part of this. And that is why when we talk about really moving positions, lots of people that were part of the old order should not be part of the new order because they're part of this wastage. Now, they're talking about over 11.35 trillion. They also mentioned that there are also hard currencies, 592 million US dollars, 4 million euros, 3 million pounds. I think that that's another one. Then the highest of it, Nigeria has not had a petroleum minister in the past 8 years.
The president.
The past administration. And I think that if we indeed are true to being patriotic about this country functioning, the people who have the power should respect institutional processes of doing things. President Muhammadu Buhari failed to comply by extant laws of allowing ministers that have the competence. The Petroleum Ministry is a specialized ministry, and it is somebody with absolute unquestionable competence to do that. We remember in his first time, Ibe Kachuku was there.
Yes.
Ibe Kachuku removed, and since that time it felt as if nobody handled it. Don't forget that preceding Ibe Kachuku was the Ziani Alison Madweke, who is now in court over the same impropriety. So I think that many people who are guardians of the estate of institutions must begin to say, you cannot. And if you look at the current administration, it's a new moment, so to speak, for this administration. But if this current president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, doesn't want to be amongst those who will be discussing for not doing their job, then he needs to appoint somebody to manage that ministry. It is very, very important. Look at Impre Silva, for instance, that took over from Ibe Kachuku. Ibe Kachuku, by all standards, is a very competent person. By privilege, I know him in person. What's the competence level of former governor of Bayelsa State, Impre Silva, in that ministry? He told us lots of things that I have in print. First of all, he told us that they've removed subsidy. Later, subsidy came back. And this kind of dilly-dallying happens when people are incompetent. And under their incompetence, for instance, this kind of losses happen. Let's also be reminded that companies like Saipem that had not delivered have been repeatedly given contracts, and many others.
Right.
So I think that it is key for this. I deliberately mentioned these people because there are identities associated with these losses. It didn't just happen. And if at all we want this ministry to be the ministry that truly functions for us, we must do the same thing. Let's go to gas a little bit. The gas operations of this country started at about the same time that Qatar started its own. For instance, Nigeria is nowhere near Qatar because they've been deliberate. It was Lee Kuan Yew that talked about the best of us leading the rest of us. But it's obvious from these losses, and that nobody has been questioned, that the seeming worst of us have the privilege of ruling. I'm careful not to use leadership, because leadership takes a whole lot. And I think that it is key we keep looking at these issues, please.
Quite interesting. You know, it's one thing for us to spend money, you know, since 2010.
Yes, please.
You know, on the renovation of the refineries.
Yeah.
You know, under the guise of turnaround maintenance.
Yes, please.
So it's another thing for it to work.
Yes.
And we had people who were receiving salaries, you know, in the course of these years.
Yes, please.
So why do you think, you know, getting down to the brass tacks, who should be answering what, and why do you think it was unproductive in the first place?
I think if you look at this period, Diziani is in court now, so we're happy that somebody who didn't handle the ministry well is answering for it. President Muhammad Buhari should answer for the 8 years because we're talking 11.35 trillion. And this is one thing that has actually bedeviled the functionality of our system, where people who held offices are oftentimes demigods and they appear to be those we cannot question. We have to question Tim Silva, who is still jostling to become the governor of Bayelsa State and is battling the law. We've got also to ask Ibe Kachuko questions because it's under his auspices as well. Sir, between such and such period, you administer this ministry. You should tell us what has happened. Melikari should be able to answer questions as a spokesperson. Absolutely. Because before this time, he had been with the NNPC. And obviously, the window we're talking about here, he happens to have been with that particular institution. And it is something key. In one of the news that we have today, NNPCL has been told to remit over 2 billion naira. Yes. I was at the training in 2016 in Port Harcourt with the Nigeria Extractive Initiative Transparency Initiative. And it was said that a lot of things are not accounted for within the petroleum ministry. Right. And I think that for every one of us who are very interested in ensuring that things happen positively for this country, we need to start looking in that direction. Don't forget, oftentimes we talk about the petroleum ministry. Do we talk about other extract? Minimally, you have about 14 to 17 extra from every crude oil. 14 to 17. Nigeria makes emphasis on one. So the question again is, for every crude we take out of this country, what happens to about 16 to 15 other products that are byproduct of it? You can make combs, you can make clothing, polybag. There are lots of things that have a lot of economic value. So when we're talking about this losses, that's it. So if you're talking about the person who should be asked questions, the two former ministers, the Zen is already answering for it. President Muhammad Buhari should also answer, because it was a substantive then Minister of Petroleum Resources. He should answer for it. And I think that we should do it. For instance, about 2 former Israeli prime ministers or presidents have been jailed. Why? Because the people of Israel entrusted that country to them, but they messed it up because leadership expects them to actually guard and guide. President Muhammad Buhari should explain. We also can go back to the era of former President Olusegun Obasanjo. He was the one who actually birthed this lack of minister for a ministry that should have a substantive minister. I said it before, it's a specialized ministry. I know Baba, I've been in Abeokuta with Baba, but the reality is, if the institution of state demands certain processes and you don't follow it, we need to ask you questions. Nobody's talking about taking these people to jail. It's your ministry. You had executive briefs every week. Every week there were executive briefs for the entire 8-year period of President Olusegun Obasanjo. President Muhammadu Buhari had executive briefs for 8 years every week for that ministry. So when we're talking about these losses, they said uneasy lies the head that wore the crown. So the uneasy nature of the crown they wore me. Okay, let's look at this. The cumulative loss, that's within 4 years, about 1.64 trillion. The operating cost between 2010 and 2020 estimated at 4.8 trillion naira. These amounts are not part of this maintenance that never existed. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, the Kaduna refinery had nothing made, but they still sent people on trainings. Trainings are supposed to make you better.
And paid salaries.
Yes, ma. To deliver value. Okay, let's even talk about 2 things, for instance. If you're talking about salaries, these are recurrent expenditures that we may not prevent the NNPC from paying because of the nature and the terms of reference of the employment. But with regard to training, those that are not producing nothing, doing nothing, and adding zero value, I think we should really look at the person who is heading that Kaduna refinery. And let's say this again. This has brought us to the platform of speaking to issues of the systems we manage. You need to ask the question, why do you need to take crude from Niger Delta to Kaduna to refine when you can actually refine and take it straight to Kaduna for use? It is part of the politics of retrogression and stagnation that we play in this country, that there should be a refinery in Kaduna without a drop of crude under its soil so that we can have it. And that is where we also need to ask those that build this nation the question of the sentiment of wanting to balance certain things when it doesn't make quite, impressive economic sense. If you look at Port Harcourt 2, if you look at Warri 1, as a matter of fact, the Warri refinery is absolutely dismal in production. The Port Harcourt refinery is the only lifeline, and that is why for the past 3-4 years we have been moving between 1.4 to 2 million. It is still over that. Whereas we have cumulative capacity of over 4 million. Another question we need to ask, who are the people administering private refineries in this country? Dangote Refinery, I need you people, I know you do your research as well. If you go check the former administration of President Muhammadu Buhari, 2.5 years before the exit in office, everybody stopped talking about these refineries that belong to the country, and we're making emphasis on Dangote Refinery. Yeah. And it is preposterous to have people that are serving this country to leave focus on national infrastructure and be laying emphasis on what they told us is owned by a private person. I think that is the most ridiculous way of leading institutions. And listen again, Mr. Emefiele, that is battling the law, and I'm happy he's got to answer, told us that the monies they collected has almost been paid off or been paid off. A refinery has not operated. We need to also ask the question, what kind of financial magic happened? Because let me say this, some of the little things we appear to leave out are the little things we need to pay attention to. And whatever experts want to say as far as this ministry is concerned doesn't hold water, because experts have failed in this conversation. And that is why they've brought us here this morning to talk about this issue. So when we look at these issues that I've laid there, we need to call the lawmakers that headed the committees on the downstream, the upstream and gas for the 8th Assembly, for the 9th Assembly. That's one. We need to also, but for the predecessor of Mele Kyari who had passed, God rest his soul, he should also have been called here to speak to this issue. So these persons that are experts in the field, that have the responsibility to manage these systems, are the ones who should come and answer. As a matter of fact, this investigation is not complete if everybody that formed part of the committee, not just the committee chairs that perhaps looked into all of this, members of those committees, then let us go fully now, sir, Amma. So the issue of these lawmakers, we often talk about legislation by lawmakers. The most arduous task for lawmakers is monitoring and oversight functions. And it is very evident from these that had been raised by Mr. Karimi that the lawmakers themselves have failed woefully. There's no other adjective to qualify, because they would have prevented these losses, ma.
And that's why I'm going to the question of capacity to really bring these persons to book.
Yes.
That you have reeled a number of persons, how we have to go back in time to bring in certain persons to account. And I'm wondering, is this an exercise in futility, or do we have the capacity to bring them to book?
In the first place, the lawmakers must understand that they cannot do this alone.
Right.
So if they can't do this alone to begin with. So if you're looking at these issues that have happened, the lawmakers must seek the support and assistance of the respective anti-corruption agencies, ICPC, EFCC. They are needed. The role of the DSS cannot be overlooked in this kind of investigation, because at some point, if you actually extend the invitation to the people that really want to ask questions, and these persons, for instance, are not coming, then you need a strong and long arm of the law to bring them to come and answer. Do not forget that lawmakers always tell us, particularly the Petroleum Ministry, that oftentimes when they call them to come and defend their budget, because these problems cannot be looked at in isolation. These problems always begin from not coming to defend budgets. Because if you say X amount will be needed in a year calendar, and lawmakers tell you to come defend your budget and you don't come, that is the first room given for you to actually do this kind of thing. Because if you send representative, the representative cannot answer to certain questions because it's your business. And that means, again, that we need to strengthen institutions. They need to de-emphasize powers of office holders. It's more than overdue. And that is why everybody must take the courage. People like us that are here today must take the courage to be able to call people. I have eaten former President Olusegun Obasanjo's wife's meal in his house in Abeokuta. But I'm here saying that Baba should be asked questions. Why? We should understand that when discussions get to a point, we leave the favors or the closeness that we have with people, and we talk about the reality of it. And let's also say this, for instance, when all these people are written to, it should also be put in public domain, because we cannot jettison the role of the citizens in ensuring that these people answer. Because if people are invited to answer for what has not been accounted for, and they refuse, and we put it in public domain, the citizens also have a way of engineering compliance of these persons, because it's very fundamental.
Quite interesting. You know, you've brought out a whole lot of people who would need to be,
yes, please,
ask a lot of questions.
Yes, please.
From the lawmakers to the former ministers.
Yes, everybody should.
The former president, etc. But then they are given 4 weeks to, do all of these findings.
Yeah.
Now, it's so clear that most of the research and most of the investigations that have been done and the recommendations made are just there in one of the shelves where they kept it in a gathering dust. What would do you think this time that is allotted for this investigation would be enough? And that is one. And the second one is, how do you think the punitive measures should be meted out to whoever is found wanted?
What would be justice in this case?
In the first place, I have to say that 4 weeks is just too short a time to do that. But the lawmakers have 4 years to deliver. And that is why we need to have special courts. Special courts. We've been talking about special courts for elections. We've been talking about special courts. I think it's time for us to look at special courts for this kind of cases. Because if there are special courts, timeline should be given. These cases cannot exceed 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year, so that you get it all done. 4 weeks is so short a time. Maybe if they did 8 weeks and focus on it, because the petroleum ministry is the cash cow of the country. And if something of that nature has to be done thoroughly, we must understand that proper time has to be given. Then another thing that I like us to do to ensure that we get the best out of this process is to let it be in public domain. Most of these hearings of these malfeasance should be broadcast live. Don't forget, the petroleum ministry, and that is why I'm not part of those that think that the petroleum industry act
Have you
is
forgotten the off-the-mic situation?
Oh, no. We will not allow the mic to... This time,
we use a megaphone.
in fact, we have to create an extended, audio device outside. But the truth is, we cannot, I have to be frank with you, allow these things to go. Let me tell you this. 11.35 trillion is more than the budget that this country put together. Let me say when Yar'Adua was there for a year calendar. And it is obvious that these monies that have not been accounted for are evidently in the pockets of some people who believe that they are close to power and they cannot be touched. Let me say this, sir. You talked about punitive measures. In the first place, any money except even the one in cash can be traced, because whatever money that you bring into your home as cash or you keep anywhere must first of all have gone to a financial institution. Absolutely. And it must then be withdrawn. So at times when they make it seem as if it is so difficult, these things are not too difficult. Then let's get back to the petroleum punitive measure first. Assets acquired with all of these things must actually be taken back. Whatever money they're able to retrieve must be taken back. I know it may not be possible to have all of 11.35 trillion back in our account, but even if it's actually half of that, and these people should spend some time alone where they can eat uncooked beans or madly cooked beans. Because the truth is, at times we just allow these things happen and we just smack their hand like this. It is very, very important. So I think that this country has the capacity to function. And I'm very happy that people like you are able to boldly come to these issues to speak about it. Because speaking about it first enables us to have an understanding of what is happening in that ministry. Right. Being able to give me or extend an invitation here provides more clarity to it. And I think that we will still be monitoring those that have the responsibility. That's right. Because Nigeria can function.
Absolutely. And we hope for the best out of this process at the end of the day.
Yes, I'm hopeful as well.
All right, Adeni Kunu, policy analyst.
Come on, I got you there. I got
policy
you there.
Analyst.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm grateful for the invitation. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes, please.